started. You'll go ahead and flip to that next slide. So before we begin, if you will please keep your video off, keep your microphone muted. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them in the chat box, and I will type something in there so you know where the chat box is. Hello. I will be moderating the chat, so if you have any issues or concerns or you can't hear one of us, please let us know in the chat. This session will be recorded and available on YouTube, and you should receive an email within 24 hours from me with the link to the YouTube video. If you are viewing this as a recording, feel free to email with me with any questions that you may have. Great, so we'll go to the next slide. So my name is Savannah Caravan, and I'm the Business Operations and Marketing Coordinator for the City of Bluefield Community and Economic Development Department, and I serve the same role for the Bluefield, West Virginia Economic Development Authority. So why are we hosting this class? The Bluefield City Board created the Community and Economic Development Department in 2015, which has evolved into the creation of the Bluefield, West Virginia Economic Development Authority. In 2019. We have a very aggressive approach to economic growth for the city and our region. And the focus of the authority, affectionately called BEDA, is to spearhead the Intuit Alorica project and to work as a catalyst to continue developing Intuit's partnership. We've taken the role of ensuring growth opportunities, development, and mentorship to the region's business owners and entrepreneurs. We're thankful for the city's partnership with Intuit and Intuit's investment in you. We're so glad that you're here, and I would love to now introduce you to your instructor and our great opportunity partner, Dr. Angela Addair. And Angela, take it away.
Okay. So thank you all for joining me this afternoon or this evening. I appreciate your time. Hopefully you'll gain some valuable information. I worked briefly in the industry to begin with, just as sort of like an introductory as a human resource staff person. Then I became a human resources director. That was all before taking the position at Concord. So I do have the industry experience as an HR director and working several years at that and working at different aspects of it, the hiring, the firing, the personnel packets, the benefits. So obviously we'll get into all of that, but my master's is in human resources. My doctorate is in finance, and undergrad was accounting. So a little bit of mix of lots of different things in the business environment as a whole. I currently am the Director of Entrepreneurial Studies at Concord University, and I also teach entrepreneurship classes there, as well as some management. Okay, so
I'm going to end that polling real quick and share the results for you to take a look at, just to gauge everyone in the room.
Okay. This is good. Okay. So it looks like almost everyone here either currently manages employees already or you're getting ready to. So hopefully part of this may even just be a refresher for you. And if it is, that's okay too. So one thing that I will say that I looked over in the Moby class, part of what they recommend is that you have a professional organization handle part of this. And while I completely understand where they're coming from, because yes, it is absolutely essential to have one in any business organization, but I also know that sometimes when you hire an outsider, sometimes that gets expensive. And so if that's the case, hopefully this little seminar and maybe some help afterwards is going to make things a lot more economical for you and hopefully a lot smoother in your organization. Okay. So first off, I want to talk about what just the handbook itself is. An employee handbook, it's an essential guide for your relationship with your employees. And I say that because if any of you have ever played the game of Monopoly, Monopoly personally is my favorite. But if you've ever played the game of Monopoly, one thing that you absolutely have to have a good understanding of is what? The rules, what's going on, how do things work? Otherwise, someone can come up and pick up the little red and green houses, move them around the board, carry them off if you're, any relation to my 2-year-old. And, well, what happened? Well, why'd they do that? Well, I don't know. I don't understand. I didn't realize that was a rule. I didn't realize I was breaking a rule. I didn't realize that was against a policy. And I use that example a lot because it's very true in business. If you don't have a handbook and you don't have a policy in place as to what's going on, it makes it really difficult for the employee to even know what to expect. What are the rules of your organization? So it helps us understand what are the rules, what do you expect? As the employer, what do you expect of your employees? And what kind of a standard do you have? And it looks currently like we're almost a 50-50 split as to those of you that do have a handbook versus those of you that don't currently have one, but you'd like to have one. So some other things about a handbook, okay? Without one, how does your employee know what the rule is? How do they know that there's a policy against it? How do they know that they're breaking something? It's very easy for them to come up and say, well, I didn't know. And nobody enjoys that game, but I can tell you that you learn very early on as a small child to play that game, right? I didn't know I wasn't supposed to touch that glass. I didn't know. Well, after it's already broken and on the floor, I should have told you, okay? So let's prevent that in business. Okay. So some information that you absolutely should include. And for those of you that already have a handbook, you may want to make sure that you have all of these pieces included, okay? Typically, on the very front cover is, the title page, and it's telling you what this is. It's your employee handbook. It gives you, typically it has, the basic information of your organization, okay? But then the next thing is very important, and sometimes it gets left out because it's sometimes just overlooked. But it's that welcome. It's that thank you for joining us. You are a part of our team now. We want you to be here. We want you to be excited to be here. Things of that nature. Typically, it's almost just like a letter format, and it comes almost always from the CEO or the president. I've also seen sometimes your person in charge of HR may write a little something as well if you have that person in that role. Okay, but that also makes your employees feel valued, and obviously we go into that in a little bit later in this seminar about retention, but that's a start. Okay, start from the beginning, making sure that your employees feel welcome. Okay, a code of ethics. The purpose of a code of ethics is you want to run your organization ethically, and you want to make sure that your employees know that you run your organization ethically. These are not hard to come up with whatsoever. Almost always are they tailored particularly to whatever industry you have. If you need any type of assistance whatsoever, feel free to come to me. If you'll shoot Savannah an email and give me your message, I will absolutely get back to you. This week, I start classes, so things will be a little hectic, but after that, absolutely, hands down, I will help you with any part of this, okay? A mission statement. A lot of smaller organizations that I've worked with overlooks this, but it's really crucial because if you can't determine what the mission of your business needs to be, how do you get your employees to get with you? You can't, because we don't know what direction you're headed. You don't even know what direction you're headed. You also don't want to make your mission statement product specific. Same as you don't want to make it, I'm sure you've already learned that if you were in the Moby classes, but you don't want to make your business name after one product because it's very hard to branch out. You also don't want to make your mission statement so small that you can't branch out a little bit, okay? But it's very important that you have one so that you really can hold on to your roots and you know where you're headed and you know where you're going and you know where you've been, okay? An at-will employee statement. I could probably talk for hours about this. So The purpose for an at-will employee statement, unless you have a union or things of that nature, you want to have something in your employee handbook stating that you have at-will employment, okay? That means there's no contract implied, and that sort of protects you as the employer. I have seen a lot of companies want to say, well, you're on a probationary period, 30 days probationary period. Okay, what happens on day 32 if I really mess up? If you don't have some type of an at-will employee statement, there are some court systems, if you go that far, for firing the employee that can say you broke an oral contract. Even though there's nothing written, it can still be implied because they've already passed their probationary period. Therefore, they're expected to have at least a year employment. You don't want to get in that if you don't have to, okay? So it's a very simple one-page document. It takes about 5 minutes to type up, but it can really save you when push comes to shove if you have to let go of someone rather unexpectedly, okay? Okay, because you don't want an implied contract if you don't have a contract with them, all right? You also want to include the hours of operation where your business is located. This becomes particularly important if you have multiple locations. So you have a main office and then you have X, Y, and Z work site, okay? Because particularly when you're saying, hey, you need to come to our main office, sometimes if the employee hasn't ever really had to go there, they may or may not even know where that's located. So you want to make sure that you give just where a main office is, okay? What hours are we open? That sort of thing. You want to make sure that you include all of this information so that your employees know. Don't leave them guessing, okay? That's going to look bad on you and them. It's also very important that you put in any type of safety standards based on whatever regulation, whether it's MSHA, OSHA, whoever you have to follow. You need to put in the process of who they need to contact should something happen. What is the process? Who do they call first? Okay, and what to do. Obviously, no one likes accidents whatsoever, but it's also extremely important that the right people are contacted when something does happen. Okay. Some other things that I would absolutely recommend that you include inside your handbook. Any type of disciplinary action process that you have, okay? So if you have no call, no shows, do you write those up? If so, put that in there. Typically your process starts with verbal, then goes to a written, and then after X amount of written, then there's a dismissal if they haven't improved, okay? It's important that you put this in writing so that the employee later can't come back and say, well, I had no idea about that. I didn't realize that I was one away from getting fired, or I had no idea that if I did 3 no call, no shows that I could be dismissed. Okay, that's ludicrous. No, it's really not. That's pretty standard. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you have that within your business organization's handbook so that there is no guessing game. You also want to include anything about the benefits. What do they offer? And what's the criteria for receiving them? Now, I mentioned earlier that you may use the term, some businesses do. I don't necessarily recommend it, but I have seen businesses say, well, you're on probation. And if you're on probation, then after probation, that's when you get benefits, etc. Okay. I would recommend that you say after X amount of days, whatever that is, that's when you start, whether it's accruing vacation, whether it's earning sick leave, whether it's PTO, paid time off, whether it's you've qualified for medical benefits, what all of those are, etc. If it's all in your handbook, it's a lot neater and cleaner and a lot easier for you to come back and say, well, yes, it is here, and we did talk to you about it, versus the employee later coming back and saying, well, I didn't know, I didn't sign up in time, and now I have health issues, so you need to cover these. Okay, you don't want in that situation. You want to make sure that your employees are covered as best they can be. Okay, it's also important that you list any type of drug alcohol use policy you're going to have. Are you going to have standardized testing, so you're tested on the 1st of every month, etc.? Or are we going to do random testing? You also want to check with your state. There are certain legal implications about testing after an accident has occurred, so you want to make sure that you're within those guidelines. But obviously, you also want to make sure that you put that in there so that there is no question later, hey, I'm refusing a test. Okay, if you refuse a test, what happens? Are you allowing that to happen? Or no, these random tests you have to complete or disciplinary action will follow. Again, very cut and dry. Some other things that may be used in your business, depending on what your specific business is. Sometimes there's a travel or a meal policy. So sometimes there will be like a mileage reimbursement. Sometimes there is a truck allowance. Sometimes we will pay for meals, but sometimes we won't. Are there specific amounts up to? I will pay up to $20 for dinner or up to $30 for dinner, but no more. Or I will pay $50 a day, however you spend that, if you have to go overnight. Okay, again, you don't want to wait until an employee goes on a trip, comes back with $300 or $400 worth of meal receipts, and you're like, really, you had lobster every day? Every day, that's great, but that's not part of our policy. Okay, it's much easier when you have all of that already written out on day one to say, look, here's what we're going to pay if you have to travel X amount of miles away from your job. Then there's no question. Okay. You may also have some specific things pertaining just to your business. Okay. If you have vehicles, are they allowed to take them home? Are they not? Is there a certain mileage away from the job site they're allowed to travel? Do you offer per diem if they have to stay all night, or do you yourself cover the hotels? There is pros and cons to both of that. Per diem, obviously, you're paying them an X amount, whether they set up a camper in the backyard near the job site, and that's allowed if that's what you do. Or you put the hotel in your name. If you put the hotel in your name, you're responsible. Again, pros and cons to both, okay? Do we have a non-compete clause? That one can get hard sometimes. So if I work for a bakery, I don't because I'm a horrible cook and bake. But anyway, if I worked for a bakery, then what would I do if you come in and, hey, I could do that cake for you at home and bring it to you. You could meet me on a Saturday. Well, am I just taking business from my employer? Sure I am. But is that allowed? Well, it depends. Do I have a non-compete clause or not? Okay. Can I take side jobs or not? Again, all of that needs to be laid out, and that's part of the reason why. Okay. So when you have this employee handbook, the very, very, very most important piece of it is the employee acknowledgement form. This is the one that you actually typically tear out of the booklet and you put in their employee file. But what that states is that they've received it, they acknowledge it. If they have any questions, they've asked. So therefore, I understand this employee handbook. Okay. It's important that you have that because that is sort of your piece of insurance to say, I'm covered. I'm good. Okay. Anything that's in this booklet, they've read, they understand, they've acknowledged that they understand it, and I have proof of it. That's the purpose of the employee acknowledgement form. So I don't want to say that your handbook is not as valuable without it, but that kind of seals the deal for it. Okay. Okay. So when you have a new employee coming on, what do you put in their file? Sometimes it's very easy just to want to put whatever they give you, but that's not always what you need to include. Okay. Things that should be in an employee's personnel file: their application and their resume, any type of safety trainings that they have received. When I was an HR director, I ran into an issue that an employee came back and said that they had not been formally trained on using this particular type of machinery. They had been trained. I had proof of their training. They had signed off on it along with their supervisor that had trained them. Had we not had that in their file, we probably would have been drug into that lawsuit as well. Okay. Thankfully, we were not. But again, any type of safety trainings, put those in there. Okay. You also want to have an emergency contact form. For me personally, whenever I handled personnel files, I always made their contact form on the inside cover of their file. That way it didn't get buried in any paperwork. It's always right there. Like I would literally tape it to the inside. And I did that mainly because should there be an accident, should there be some emergency happen, well, we're going to have to find out who to contact, and we're going to have to do that really quickly. So I don't want to be digging through personnel files to try to find this, okay? You make sure that you have it in there, but I would recommend putting it on the inside cover so that you have it, it's covered, and it's there, okay? You also want to make sure that you have any notes from any meetings that you've had. Now, this can be important for two main reasons. Number one is disciplinary action, but the other is on the flip side of that, if you're wanting to promote someone, you're wanting to give them some recognition, whatever that is. So from one extreme to the other, you want to have those notes so that it's, hey, this person did excellent here, here, and here. Or, oh, we've already counseled this person 3 times. This issue is not being resolved. We need to take further action, okay? But again, you don't want it to be your word against theirs. And if you have actual notes from these meetings, well, that's the proof. There's where you go. There's your evidence of it. You also want to have any evaluations. I cannot stress the importance of having an evaluation. Almost all of us have some form. A lot of people typically do just the top down, the traditional, my supervisor is going to evaluate me, period. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the peer evaluations, also referred to as the 360-degree evaluations. And the reason why I'm a huge fan of those is they get more than just one opinion. Okay, so number one, it kind of smooths over, hey, my boss just doesn't care for me. Not that that happens, but we all know that occasionally it will. It also smooths out that, look, when my boss comes in, my feet are not on my desk, my magazines are not out, but my coworkers see that every day and they're pulling the slack for me, okay? So when you have someone else that can help evaluate, so again, that's coworkers, that's your supervisor, that's even as far as customers, suppliers, it really encompasses everybody that we have worked with to weigh in, okay? So it also takes away any favoritism or any discrimination, if I can use that word loosely, okay? You also want to make sure that any disciplinary action, even if it's a verbal warning, you still document that and put that in your file, okay? Even, I realize that, no, this is not the written warning, but you still need to document when you talk to them, okay? You also want to have any type of promotions, anything of that nature, because again, that all relates to this employee's work performance. Things that you do not include whatsoever is any information pertaining to their health. So you may be saying, well, why would I get health information? Well, so typically you have health benefit enrollment forms. You do not put that in the personnel file. You also do not include anything if you are gathering. So typically if you're getting quotes from an insurance company because, hey, maybe we're wanting to price out benefits or things of that nature, you'll have to have like a health survey of all of your employees so that they can give you the quote, okay? Those documents, while I understand you probably will keep, but for a certain period of time, you do not put them in the employee's file whatsoever, okay? You also don't put any information regarding the I-9 form, which the employee has 3 days to complete, or the I-9 documentation. One other thing that I want to say about that while I'm on it, whenever we're talking about an I-9 form, that's your employment eligibility. You cannot legally say, I need your driver's license and your birth certificate to fill out this. Now, is that the common ones that you receive? Yes, I would say 8 out of 10, that's what I got, okay? But if a person wants to give you their voter registration or any of the other acceptable forms to verify, they can. And you are not allowed to say, that's not what I want to verify this with, okay? They have the choice. Your job is just to document it, verify it, and move on, okay? Okay. So something else that happens that we don't really enjoy, okay, is employee conflict. And I'm curious to see how many of you have ever had to deal with it. Do you deal with it a lot? Okay.
I'm going to let this run for a couple of seconds. So everyone, if you're listening, a poll has popped up on your screen. If you'd be so kind as to view the Zoom call and complete the poll, that'd be greatly appreciated. I'm going to close that in about 30 seconds. Okay, I'm going to stop the poll and share the results.
Okay, so it looks like everybody's dealt with it at some point. Some more often than others, but still we've all dealt with it, okay? So first, let me ask this. When you're thinking, I just want you to think about your occurrences, okay? When the employees came to you, if you're in that management role, when the employee came to you, did you choose a side to begin with? Just think about that for a second. Were you biased already? And no, I'm not asking for a show of hands, or we're not going to do a poll on that one. But again, were you biased? Okay. One thing that is extremely important when it comes to employee conflict is you have to be neutral, particularly when it comes to the human resource side of things. You have to be neutral because you are that neutral person, okay? It's extremely important that you stay calm. Now, if you know anything about me whatsoever, for the most part, I try to be very calm and easygoing, but I do not have a lot of patience, okay? And so sometimes that's hard. It really is. Like there's days that I remember working as an HR person and I just felt like I was a therapist, okay? You also have to remember that all of us are human and we have to show grace. Okay, I cannot emphasize that enough, particularly in human resources. You have to show grace because what if this person comes in and they have a sick child? What if they're going through sick parents or marital issues or financial troubles? Or, I mean, my goodness, there are all kinds of things going on, even in our world right now. Do you just think about yourself? Do you leave that at the door before you come into your office? Probably not. It's probably hard just to leave it at the door, shake it off like you're taking a coat off, and walk on in. Now, while some of us are probably better at handling that and putting that compartment away than others, it's still hard, okay? So sometimes conflict is going to happen and we're going to have to work through it and we're going to have to deal with it. But the biggest thing for you as someone who's hearing the complaint, okay, is to stay calm. Make sure that you get all sides of the story and you remain neutral. It's also important that you talk to each individual separately because there could even be a little bit of fear or I'm scared, or if I really tell you everything that's been going on, I'll get fired, or there's all kinds of things that can come up, okay? I will tell you that in my experience, a good 75, 80, maybe even a higher percentage than that, it's miscommunication, okay? When you're in the heat of the argument, you don't realize that. Most of the time, all you're focused on is I'm right and they're wrong, okay? So if you personally have already taken a side to this, well, that other person automatically is at a disadvantage, okay? So that's part of why it's really important that you stay neutral. It's also important that you hear everyone out. One of the biggest things that I dealt with that I still remember to this day, we had one manager who was giving the majority of the hard work, okay, the harder assignments, if you will, to one employee. And that employee was fed up. And it was a Friday and they were done with it, okay? And that's the best way I can say it. However, that employee came to me and was like, that's it, I'm leaving. And I was like, it's Friday. What are you talking about? You're leaving. Like, I mean, you know, we're not going to have any of this. Oh my goodness. So then I pulled both employees in and talked to them individually separately, not with one in the office, but completely just us. And the issue at hand was one felt they were being dumped on because all of the hard work was assigned to them. And yet the supervisor was giving that employee that harder work, if you will, because he was the best one we had. He was the most qualified. And you know what? He had very few errors. So when push come to shove, hey, he's the go-to guy. But the problem was there was never praise. There was never, hey, I really appreciate you. So that employee did not feel very valued by that manager. And that was a very young manager. Okay, I will say that. But it was very apparent these people can absolutely work together. And you know what? They did. After that, I pulled them both together after listening to their stories, okay, their issues. And I was like, so here's what this employee is saying. They feel like you're dumping all of the work on them. I said, but what you're not hearing is you're getting the harder assignments because you're the best one in the department. I am? Yes, that's absolutely what your boss just said to me. Okay. So again, if you're dealing with conflict, make sure that you understand what's going on from each person. And again, sometimes it can be outside issues that have absolutely nothing to do with the job, but it's almost like one little tiny thing can happen at the job, and that was it. That's the last straw. I have a sick child at home. Finances are tight. My parents are sickly. My marriage is just, oh my goodness, all over the place. So this one thing at work, that was it. When really that one thing at work was so small and minute, it really, on a normal day, that wouldn't have faced anybody. Okay, so those are things to think about. How do you retain good employees? So you've went through this hiring process. How do you retain your employees? How many of you right now currently have active goals to work to retain them?
And for those who are not watching but are listening, we have launched another poll. So if you'd be kind to return to your screen and fill out that poll real quick, we greatly appreciate it. I'm going to let this run for a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to share the results.
Okay. So this is good. It looks like the majority of you currently already have some active goals to help retain your employees, which is great, okay? One of the absolute biggest things that I'm going to say about employee retention is you have to get to know your employees. A lot of people make the mistake of, oh, I'll just give them a raise. I'll just give them a raise. I'll give them a raise. I'll give them a raise, okay? I can tell you firsthand, I personally have not always went for the job that offered me the most money. Sometimes it's time off that you want. Sometimes it's being able to spend time with your kids. Sometimes it's the benefit package. So there's a lot of different things that motivate people, but it's important that you know what that is. Okay. It's also extremely important that when someone does a good job, tell them. Don't assume that they know that. Don't say, well, I mean, you're expected to do your job. That's what you're here for. Okay. If someone's doing a really good job, let them know, whether that's employee of the month, whether that's a new parking space out front, whether that's a pizza party, whether that's, hey, you know what, take the afternoon off and go golf, whatever that can be, okay, from small to large. It's important to let someone know that they're doing a good job, okay? There's times that I've even just had like candy bars in my office. And so when like a supervisor would call in and you know, kind of give praise to a specific individual or things of that nature, I would send them a candy bar in an inner office envelope, okay? Again, small things, but I don't ever remember sending a candy bar, anything of that nature that I didn't get a thank you for, okay? So don't always assume, well, I can't give them a raise, so there's really no need to say anything. No, that's not always the case whatsoever. Again, sometimes it's a little thing, as a candy bar or a pizza party or a couple hours off or lots of different things. Maybe you buy their lunch, okay? But make sure that they know that you're proud of them, okay? Also, are you showing them, and this is huge, I can't stand on this one long enough, okay? But are you showing them that you're not asking them to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself? And part of that goes back to ethics, but also part of that goes back to, yes, I realize that I'm the boss, I'm the owner, I'm the president of this organization, or I'm in an administrative role, etc. But we're all human, and I absolutely was taught to show the same respect to someone in housekeeping as I was someone in the administrative office. Okay? So again, how are you retaining your employees? How are you treating them? Make sure that you reward good behavior because it's extremely important. It's vital. When I worked for one hospital, we had all of the department heads at a retreat. And in this, they talked about, it was an HR activity, and they said, we want to know, who do you feel is the most important in this hospital? Who do you feel should, who's the top? So to make a long story short, the very first ones that stood up was the person that was in charge of the physicians. And they were like, hey, we're the doctors here. Without us, you don't have a hospital. Okay? And while I understand where they were coming from, it was very quick after that the nurses stood up and said, look, clearly it's us, because without us doing your bedside manner, etc., handing you all of those tools that you need for surgery, you wouldn't perform it. So it's us, the nurses. So it kind of went and trickled down, okay? The ancillary departments, the lab, the x-ray, the respiratory therapy, of course, they ran the tests. You wouldn't know they were canceled sales if we didn't come back and tell you, etc. Okay? So then billing was like, well, without us, you can't run. True. It's all true. Everyone's important. Dietary stood up, and of course, everyone in the hospital had to be fed. They made a good call. The very last person to stand up, and she was the most humble department head that I've ever met, was housekeeping. And with her head down, she spoke so softly, and she said, well, we're just housekeeping, but I'm the last one, so it was my turn to stand. You could tell that she did not feel valued. She did not feel that she was making a difference in that hospital. And so then the director of HR stood up and said, well, I want to ask all of you all, how many of you would like to be a patient in a dirty hospital? There were 0 hands. 0. So how many of you would like to be admitted if we didn't have housekeeping? No one takes out the trash. No one cleans anything whatsoever. No one looks at the floors, nothing. Guess what? Even those doctors that were the very first to stand up suddenly realized the importance. Every department, every person within your organization is valued. You need to make sure you show them that. I will say, after this activity, she went back to her department and she relayed the message. And it was like a complete turnaround. You could tell that they took pride in what they did. Not that they didn't before, but it was like they felt their own value. And probably one of the best exercises that I can remember from a human resource standpoint that was done. Because again, who do you think is most important? We all are. And you have to make sure that your employees realize that. Okay, I did leave some time for questions. If you all have certain questions, feel free to ask. I will also say that if you would like help with a handbook or anything that we've talked about today, you don't have one, you'd love one, whatever, by all means, if you will get in touch with Savannah and forward that on to me, I don't mind looking over it. I don't mind helping it. However I can help you, I absolutely will.
And that's not the end of all the information we have, so please don't log off just yet. And Dr. Addair, if you will flip the slide. It doesn't look like we have any questions so far.
Okay.
But that was extremely informative, and I really appreciate you doing this for us today. Just so everyone knows, Dr. Addair will be joining us again on August 26th for a webinar. And this webinar will specifically be on the interviewing and onboarding employees. We'll discuss what you can and can't ask in an interview, what you should ask in an interview, and the onboarding process for new hires, such as drug screening, the American with Disabilities Act, employment eligibility verification, and other legal considerations. I dropped the link for that in the chat. If you're viewing this on YouTube, feel free to shoot me an email if you want to be added into that list. Anyone is welcome to attend these webinars. However, if you're local to the region, and that includes Southern West Virginia, Tazewell, Virginia, and Blaine, Virginia, and you need additional information on this topic or any other topic relating to business, feel free to reach out to us. We are always searching for new content to host webinars and eventually post more in-person classes once it's deemed safe after COVID. And if you have a particular niche topic, we can connect you with another Create Opportunity partner that can help you out. So if you'll flip to that next slide. And thank you all for joining us. If you'd be so kind to fill out the survey, I dropped that in the chat box as well. This allows us to continue offering great course content, and it lets Intuit know that we are doing our job and providing you all with really quality content. Again, that link to that survey is in the chat. If you are viewing this as a recorded session on YouTube, the link to the survey is in the description of the video, and please feel free to take that. Dr. Addair and I will hang out for a couple of extra minutes. So if you have any last minute questions or have some brief chat, we'll be here. Other than that, thank you all so much for attending the session.